This is the Coaching Leader Podcast, a podcast about coaching, leadership, and leading through coaching. And here's your host, Scott Gress.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Coaching Leader Podcast. Like many podcasts and media, it's a good time to reflect on 2020 and then also to look forward to 2021. And we thought one of the best people to help us do that is Reverend Dr. Rick Armstrong. Hi, Rick. How are you?
I'm good, Scott. You?
Good. You know, you've been a guest on the podcast a number of times already, but maybe there are people who don't know you or aren't aware of your work. So just give us a thumbnail sketch of your life and ministry and study and experiences that would help us to understand your perspective in looking at the past and planning for the future.
Wow. I was a parish pastor. I'm an ordained pastor. Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, was a parish pastor for 25 years. Started two congregations, served in a mid-sized congregation, and then my last almost 11 years was senior pastor, large church, big school, big budget, big staff, and then I accepted a position as associate director at Lutheran Counseling Services here in Orlando, eventually operations director, and then whenever the founder retired, I was executive director for 7 years, and retired now, part-time, still. LCS has asked me to continue, and the new director has asked me to continue seeing clients, and so I do that 3 days a week. And other background, I for a lot of time in my ministry following the parish, did a lot of disaster crisis response, hurricanes, natural disasters, but also some situations. My team responded to 9/11 in New York City for about 3 years off and on, and spent some time in Newtown. No, that's not the name of the town. In Connecticut, following, I hope you excerpt that out, in Connecticut, following the Sandy Hook shootings. And so that crisis work has, and response to crisis, has been part of my background as well. So
yeah, and I think what's helpful, as I asked you bring some of that up, is to understand that much of your work in those crisis situations was you as Christian counselor, therapist, caring for those who cared for others.
Mm-hmm.
And providing support for church workers who are the caregivers for their community and their congregational members. And so I think you bring to this podcast episode a particularly important perspective in recognizing how situations and contexts can affect the leader.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And what you kind of need to be aware of and watch out for, and maybe those blind spots that people have that you might assume you're fine, but on the other hand, it's kind of affected you. And to be self-aware will enable you to be all the more intentional moving forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, a definition that I would usually use, that I've used a lot in terms of working with organizations and systems following crisis, is a crisis is not just the critical event that took place. It's how we respond to that which took place, and an understanding that crisis in communities, in our personal lives, in relationships change things, that things are not the same after a crisis has occurred. And what's important for us to understand is how that will affect folks really has a lot to do with how you respond and how you understand the effects of that critical incident. Um, um, I also have to say that, in terms of thinking about this time with you, I think the other thing that I bring is my wife and I have hunkered down and lived in a smaller world during this pandemic response. We've been very clear on what is good for us and what's potentially not good for us. And so we've kind of set how she and I are going to respond in that way. And part of that does and continue to be trying to help those who are working through this time. And so we continue to serve. I continue to serve in that way on a part-time basis. So it's just
Yeah.
trying to understand where we are and looking at how this critical incident affects our relationship, affects other relationships, affects the church. And even as you said, it has a lot to say to leaders and for leaders to understand the effect and the response to that critical incident.
Yeah, that's important, and maybe something that is easy to push aside or even be
Oh,
in
yeah.
denial of,
Mm-hmm.
as you want to snap back to the way it used to be, or something like that. And what were you telling me recently that the LCS Lutheran Counseling Services is a regional counseling agency that has numerous satellite offices. Your client load has increased by, what did you say, 50% this past year, largely due to the pandemic?
Right. Yeah. Those are the director. The director shared those statistics. I think they were somewhere around 39 to 44% or something in the last 4 months that it has increased. There was a lull. We would say there was a lull initially in the first 2 months or so of the quarantine and all, but then it picked up after that. And I think that for us, it also is a reminder. There's the analogy. I live in Florida, and so there's been a lot of discussion about. I remember one lady saying to me that she said, "This feels like a hurricane time," and she said, she said, first of all, I don't see the cone, the prediction of where the storm's going to go. She said, I don't see the cone, and I'm not real sure if the storm is on its way or if it has already passed. And I think that there is that piece of, you said it a while ago, of it's what happens afterwards. There's a tendency to always want it to pick up and go back to what was, and all of the storms and natural disasters that I've worked with, that's the predominant piece on people's minds. I just want to go back to the way it was, rebuild my house, rebuild our community, get back to life as it was. And the truth is, what we've discovered is we never really get back to what it was. There's no way to reduplicate that. And I think that that's part of what's going to happen and be our challenge, not just as a nation and as churches, but a world. I mean, because this is a worldwide event in that way.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thinking about this past year, how has this pandemic impacted people in your clinical work, in your meeting with people, in your own observations and experiences? How has 2020 impacted people, would you say?
Somebody wrote down the notes here in front of me. Take that out. So I just wanted you to. I think one of the things that strikes me is, and it is the case in most crisis response. The rhythm of life has changed. The way we did life, we can't do life like that. We haven't been able to do life like that for the last, well, since March. There's some pieces that feel like they're the same, but it's in a context that is entirely different, which really changes a lot of things. And that has to do with loss. literally loss of life, loss of what was, loss of job, loss of relationships, loss of the sense of community. Our sense of community, in a lot of ways, what I've experienced, has gotten much smaller as we've kind of had to rein things in. And I do experience also with people that's been the fight and the struggle sometimes is they're going to challenge and they're going to go out there and try to expand my size of my community once again, and then all the danger of that comes about. There's been a lot of fear. There's been a lot of anxiety because of other issues that has gone on in this time. There's been a lot of mistrust. There's a lot of suspicion as to what are the facts, and not really always understanding the facts. And some of that has been about COVID-19. Some of that has been about a political process that was going on in this whole time. Also, some of that's been about the whole rising of the racism and hate issue and everything that's just kind of occurred during this time too. And it's been 9 months, 10 months, just packed with a lot of things that are emotionally pulling at us and changing us in that way. I think in a lot of ways. So,
What do you think people are in their experience have they discovered is most surprising, or they didn't anticipate, but gee, this is how I've been affected. Anything come to you with that?
Well, I do believe the surprise was, I think by and large, people had no idea this was out there. And so it wasn't like we had, well, if we've been reading a lot and everything, maybe, and, we can talk about leadership of our nation and world, we could talk about that, but it kind of came on as a surprise. And there was so we didn't have a lot of time to process it. We just kind of had to move into those modes quickly. And all of a sudden it was upon us. And I think one of the surprises for folks was it really was a time where we really did not have a good idea as to when was it going to end. And when could we say we're just going to go back to the way, at this point, we can just go back how it was. This is just temporary. And I think we kind of struggled with that in March and April. And I think it was probably around, oh my goodness, this is here for a long time. And we really don't know when this is going to stop. There's this elusive thing of a vaccine out there, but that just became kind of an elusive thing. And we just really didn't know. And there wasn't a lot of firm data as to when that was going to happen. So I think that was a big surprise for people. And I would say on the positive side, what I've experienced, I believe there's a lot of people that have, once they got over the initial shock, I think there has been a surprise for some in their relationships, as it's just kind of we've been brought together with it. Oh my goodness, we can survive this. I can adapt. I can be resilient. My family, the people I live with, my marriage, my partners. Wow, we can get along and we can enjoy life and we can find ways to do that. And I don't like it, but I got to be a teacher at the same time as I've got to be working my regular job because my kids are at home and they need my help. And I got some stamina that I didn't think I had. And so I think there's been some surprise for us, hopefully, about the ability that we've had to adapt and to be resilient. And that hasn't been for everyone. I mean, not all relationships have flourished and done well during these times. And there's been some real tragedies in those times. But I think that's, for some people, have been a surprise.
Yeah. And as we all shift our attention to 2021, it's we're recording this just before the end of 2020, and where everybody's kind of anticipating kick that 2020 to the curb and hallelujah to 2021. But as somebody who's counseled folks through transitions and through crisis moments and so forth, what do we need to be aware of for 2021 to face it with a sense of soberness or appropriate preparation?
Well, I do think we need to be realistic, and hopefully these times have allowed or have taught us to be more realistic in our expectations. I'm believing that most people realize that just because we're going to switch a calendar event tonight, that doesn't mean that all of this is going to go away real quick. Um, the the key in so many ways is the vaccine, and becoming for the culture to then be able to survive the transmission of this disease and everything, and that's going to take a while. Just the whole piece of getting the vaccine out there, and that logistical piece is going to take a while. And I think it's important to understand that as this kind of came on quickly, and we had to learn to find our place in this, we've got to continue to be resilient as things move. I think it's also real important. One of the things I've learned over the years is in those transitional times, which is what we've experienced. We went from what was, and we're going to get to a place of the new normal. And we've I've used the language a lot of that we've wandered in the wilderness some. We've experienced this period of confusion and distress. It's a transitional time, but I guess what I've learned over the years is that the potential of transitional times is they can also be transformational times.
Oh,
It's in times like these that we change, and that we learn some things about ourselves, and we learn some things about the world around us, and we learn some things about that's important for us to, I think, important for us to hang on to and to be aware of. So,
how can we be, as leaders, as individuals, as organizations, as churches, how can we be more intentional about it being a positive transitional change rather than impatient? I want it to be like it was, and so let's just make it happen February 1st or January 1st or March 1st, whatever. How can we be more intentional about it being that positive transformation? Because clearly it's not going to be the same.
mm-mm. Well, I think that piece of what you just said, Scott, I think that's a piece that I hear some people really struggling with and debating. That some are just saying, I can't wait to get back to the way it was March 2020, and that there is a sense of belief that we can do that. And I, like you, don't believe that I don't believe that's possible, and I also don't believe that's healthy. That I think that we need to take advantage of what we've learned and how we are different. And so, and I don't mean to say this in a way of we need to overly psychoanalyze ourselves in our organizations, but I think it's real important somewhere along the way here is to pause and say, what have we learned? What have I learned about me? What's our family learned together? What do I want to take from this that's positive and that I want to incorporate in my new normal? Organizations, churches, what did we learn? What Look around, and what's different that we didn't see before? The church was already in a transition back in March and the times before. I mean, studies and statistics have told us clearly that we don't have the same place in the culture that we used to 40 years ago, and that we were transitioning already. And so, what did we learn during this time? And what do we bring from that into our new normal? And how do we do that as an organization? How does it change the conversation in council meetings or elders meetings or staff meetings or whatever? And how do we staff for that? Because I just don't believe it's going to be the same. And we need to utilize it's important to utilize the transition to be transformational, and to help us live out and help us be effective and as God's people into the future.
Yeah, as you were saying, we were already in a transition in March of 2020, in February of 2020. Things were already challenging, but it seems like the pandemic in many ways has just accelerated this transition or transformation. And it's really up to us to ask those important questions of ourselves, like you say, to pause and say, what have we learned? How have things changed? How have we changed? Because we're very different people who are engaging this new future. And so what are we going to do differently that we maybe should have adopted earlier, but we were in our patterns and we didn't really have a reason to change, but now we have an opportunity to change. Mm-hmm. And what were you telling me the other day, that it's during these challenging times that we can be even more intentional or even more purposeful in adopting new behaviors or new patterns or those new challenges?
Yeah, what we find with systems is whenever there are these critical incidents and there are these transitional times, there is this window when we have the ability to make some adaptations. We have the walls of resistance are down because trying to survive and adapt in order to make it through the days and the weeks. And so there is some walls of that resistance, which is often the piece that sends us back to the way it always was. And so while the walls of resistance are down, it's a good time to start looking at what can we incorporate from what we've had to what we want to be. And so there's some apt times for this and going on. I think it's important for us to be aware of that as organizations and as families, as individuals, and do some intentional thinking and working on how do I want to be, and what do I want that to look like, and what do I have the ability to change in that and make happen.
That also mean that if people are at the place where they're recognizing that they need to make some adaptations, and I would expand that to include not just individuals, but organizations or ministries or churches, does that also, and the resistance is down, does that mean that the fears that we had before that maybe caused us to be too afraid to make those necessary changes, does that mean that the people that we lead will be less resistant as well, that maybe they'll be more willing to adopt new patterns or new behaviors or new approaches? Can you say something about that?
Well, I would first of all answer that by saying that could be. Because one of the things I've learned working with people is it's hard to predict human behavior. Okay, but I would say that these times can allow for some of that to be more open. And but I wouldn't guarantee across the board that that's going to happen always. But it's something that I think it's important to take our shots at and to look at doing. And it was interesting. And I think you and I talked about this recently. I don't remember where that was, but looking back at the end of the wilderness wandering for the people of Israel, as the transition of power was taking place from Moses to Joshua, Moses talked about, God talked to Joshua about, first of all, be strong and courageous. And do not be discouraged or terrified, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go. And then if you look at that section there in Joshua, there was this methodical working of different issues and different planning processes that needed to take place that led up to the people crossing the river, circling Jericho, 7 times or whatever. But it wasn't an automatic, Moses died, we need to go in the new land, boom, they're gone. There was this process that went on to get them ready and to get them as a team and get them focused on how this is going to be and make those moves. And I think it's important for us to think in terms of that too, is it's a process we need to work, and we can trust that God's going to be with us through this transition into our new normal. And we can think back to other new normals that we've experienced, as we never thought we would get there, and that it could be okay, and that I had learned, and boom, here I am again. And maybe the death of a loved one, maybe it was a huge financial loss at that time, maybe it was a major job and dreams that went away, and I never thought I would recover. But here I am again, and we methodically make our way through that. And I think it's important for us to think in those terms now.
Yeah, that's great. The illustration from Scripture, and how God could have snapped his fingers,
Hmm.
but he chose to lead them to go through a process. And to the reader, you know, yeah, it seems self-evident what was going to happen. But if you were actually part of those people experiencing that transition, you kind of had that grace space to get used to it, to understand it, to lean into it, and then finally that new normal was taking place.
Hmm.
And as I'm thinking about what you're saying, I'm imagining, you know, you say it could, because human behavior is unpredictable. I'm imagining that there are some in the board of directors meeting who will go, "Oh yeah, that's self-evident. We got to do it." But there might be some in the board of directors meeting who are just don't like the idea of something being different, even though they know it has to happen. And so they're going to put up a roadblock and be resistant.
Hmm.
And you can't be too excited about the one or too upset with the other,
Hmm.
but you keep methodically working through it with everybody, and talking about it, maybe taking some baby steps, first steps, next steps, seeing how things go, and a consensus will be built
Hmm.
that is appropriate for the context that you find yourself in. Um, and as along those lines, we're hearing from Barna and others that 1 in 5 churchgoers have not returned back to church, whether it's online or in person. Those people who were maybe regular attenders have just decided, well, that's not necessarily what I'm going to be doing with my life. And so whether it's online or in person, they're just disconnected now. So the church leader is going to find themselves really in a different context, but yet an opportunity to say, okay, where are we? What should we do? And to help people think that through rather than being told what to do.
Hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think one of the pieces that I've experienced, listening to folks and watching church organizations, well, some church organizations, I would have to say, this has been a time for us not as much to talk about Jesus as it's been a time to be Jesus, and doing it in ways that we we couldn't do from before. All of the months that we did not gather face to face, but still served, still reached out to those who were in need, still continued to financially support the ministry. And I think that it's those pieces that I hope we hang on to, that we learned that we couldn't do what we've always done, which has been a hallmark of church and many other organizations, is do what I've always done. We've learned that we couldn't do that, but we could still be the church, and we could still serve, and we could still reach out and care for people, and we could still be a voice of care and not hate, and maybe even trying to move past the political divide, and and be with each other, no matter who you are. And I just think that was huge for many people of the church and many churches. And I pray that that's what we learned and what we continue.
Yeah, as I'm listening to you, I can't help but think of a time when I did the funeral of a non-member school parent where I served. And then a month after the funeral, as is good pastoral practice, you call them up and you check on them, et cetera. And how you doing? I know you lost your husband, and just wanted to say hello. And her response was, well, I know you're calling because you want me to come to your church. And I said, no. I mean, it'd be nice, but that wasn't it.
Right, right.
And it occurs to me, so much of what we do from our perspective may be, well, if I do this, maybe they'll come to church. And when they receive care, maybe sometimes they perceive that what they're doing is because they're wanting me to come to their church. But when you don't have the church to go to, it kind of clarifies your motives. Maybe it cleans them up, but then it also gives credibility to your acts of love. And that tends to, recalibrate your thinking and reprioritize things, be a better steward of your efforts, and even begin to think those questions. Well, what does it really mean to be a Christian, to be a Christian church? And how do you lead this organization as a pastor or a lay leader to be the best that I can be moving forward now in this new context? So what does that look like for you as you're sort of reimagining what could happen in the future? Did any concrete things come to mind?
Well, I do believe that, first of all, this time reminded us of the gift that we have that needs to be developed of the digital age. And I think for many, a lot of stuff about being on social media or being on the computer a lot, or getting your news through websites or whatever, that before March, that was, oh my goodness, why do people continue to do that? Since March, it's been, wow, what a gift we have. And I can't tell you how many people told me how important it was for them that they could still attend Bible study because it was on Zoom, and they didn't know Zoom at all, but now they do.
Yeah.
How many times youth leaders that I talked to who would do a Zoom Bible study with their youth group, and then as it ended, that people would get off, but 2 or 3 would hang on because they really wanted to have community. And so youth leaders learned how to develop that in that serendipitous way. And so, and even after the pandemic is gone, there's still going to be people that can't travel a long way, still got health compromised issues that they can't come in. We're still going to need to do that. And maybe it gives us a stronger sense of how important it's going to be if we really want to reach as many people as possible. I know in the work that I do, I think right now, just kind of off the top of my head, I believe that only half of my clients that I'm lined up to see in the next 2 weeks live in the Orlando area. That because of the whole virtual piece and being able to do counseling, to larger distances and everything, that's just happened a whole lot more. I was involved in doing a lot of support groups for church workers through Zoom, and those folks were all over the country, and how important, where at times we felt like we had separated from others, but there was, through the technology that we have, there was a bringing together of people that we didn't know before. And I hope that that doesn't stop. I hope we don't insist that all of those people come back in the same room, because some people can't. And and for some, it's going to take a while to even trust the systems that they don't get sick. And I think that we just got to honor that and continue to build that in that way. And that's part of the looking at the gifts, looking at the learnings that we've had, and how can we expand on that. How can I expand on the fact that God took care of us during this time? Yeah, there's a lot of people that didn't survive it physically, but for those who did, that we have been survivors by God's grace. And what does that say to us? And what have we been? What are we survivors for? And I think that that's what's important for us. And it's not, again, it's not just about let's go back to March 2020. Where he's he why has he brought us to this place? And I think that's going to be important for us, not just in churches, but as families, other organizations, businesses, and all of that. So, yeah.
Yeah, and what that brings up for me as I'm listening to you is it would be so easy to kind of circle the wagons and manage what we can control, uh, which is increasingly shrinking. Because instead of 80, we've now got 30 or 20 in worship and maybe 15 online views or something. But instead, you know, pause and say, who are we touching that we didn't touch before? Who are we hearing from? Calls, emails, logins, live views, whatever it is. Who can help us that we didn't even have a relationship with before? And pausing and saying, what a blessing. And intentionally responding to that rather than kind of managing what's continually shrinking.
I guess maybe I'll try to explain what's going on in my head.
Okay.
It's hard sometimes. I'm praying that it is not easy for us to go back to March 2020. I pray that as leaders get together, as families get together, and as some will try to push us back there, that is a place that causes resistance. That says, oh no, we experienced this for a purpose, and where do we move from here? And that's my prayer. That's my prayer, that we really do embrace the resiliency that we gained and move forward. So
that's a great way to end. So let me ask you, are there any final thoughts that you'd like to share?
I think it's also really important to understand that the nature of transitions, that so we're going to find a new normal. Maybe vaccine takes over and things are humming along. But just the way life is, we're not going to sit there nice and comfortable for very long. And it's just, the transitions, the losses of different types, the changes that go on are going to continue to go on. And we're gonna wish it wasn't that way, but that's how life is. But I think what's always important is to understand. I guess for me, it's important to understand two things. Number one, unfortunately, I am limited to a smaller view of life in the world, because that's all my brain can hold, and that's all we usually can hold. But there is the one who gave life and continues to remake life, that has a larger view, and his view and his being is all grounded in grace and mercy. And so I can trust that that larger view is going to be filled with grace and mercy in that way. And secondly, I've learned anything, and I hope if any of us have learned anything, even though we have been alone, we learn that, no, I'm not really alone, and that there is more available to me than what I thought was available to me, and how I can trust in that. and how the God of all grace really does love me because I am His, not because of what I do. And I think that's important to grab onto. Yeah.
Yeah. Relax in the arms of that Almighty God
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in a context that we can't control. And while we don't like it at times, maybe most of the time, it's still okay.
That's right. That's right.
Well, remind us how people can get in touch with you or with Lutheran Counseling Services.
We have a website, lcsfl.com. And my email address is rrarmstrong@lcsfl.com. And that's probably the best way to get a hold of us, to get a hold of me. And we have other therapists in our office. And I have an associate, a good friend, who's a wonderful coach that could be helpful for you as well. And it's the guy that's that leading this podcast, and hopefully he's going to share his information on here too. That as we continue to be available to help folks during these times.
Well, thank you so much, Rick. And it's great to have you on the podcast again. And don't be surprised if maybe as this society is opening up a little bit more and maybe we're getting closer to herd immunity, we'll check in with you again on your thoughts and where we're at.
All right. Hey, and blessings to you, and thank you for what you've been doing. The podcast that you've done during this time, I know has been very helpful to lots of folks, and so I appreciate that, and I appreciate the honor of being part of that. So thank you.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
I'd like to thank Rick Armstrong for bringing his reflections on 2020 and his predictions on 2021 and how we can be a little bit more intentional and aware and moving forward into 2021. And speaking of 2021, we're excited about some leadership training materials that we're putting together, possible ebook, other resources on the Teachable platform. We'd love to be a support for you and what you're doing in getting more people into the pipeline of leadership and growing as disciples. We're just going to call it growing people for ministry. So reach out to us and we'd love to talk to you, and God bless you in 2021 and beyond.